A family is in mourning after a Portland cemetery accidentally sold them a burial plot that belonged to somebody else. The grave, which served as a memorial for the family's son, was removed today. Fox 12's McKenna Marks joins us live after speaking to that family. McKenna, what happened at the cemetery today?
Yeah, Pete, well, there just aren't enough words to describe exactly how heavy and emotional the atmosphere was here at Skyline Memorial Gardens today. Now, the family of Tiber Harrison gathered here today while the cemetery dug up his memorial site. And all of this comes after a legal battle involving the cemetery, Harrison's family, and another family who had originally purchased that plot.
This is a sacred place that's being desecrated today.
David Williams is married to Paula Tigneau, whose son passed away in Florida back in 2016. The family later moved to Oregon and decided to purchase a burial plot at Skyline Memorial Garden in 2021 to serve as a memorial for Paula's son, Tiber Harrison, who was just 20 years old when he was killed in a car accident.
I just heard a lot of amazing stories about him. He's full of mischief and a leader of the sibling of the pack. Obviously, Paula adored him.
But it turns out the cemetery made a serious mistake. The gravesite had already been purchased in 2019 by the Reeser family. The Reesers plan to use the site for a memorial bench for their late son, buried in an adjacent plot. But items of Harrison's, including some of his baby teeth, hair, ashes, and personal mementos, were already in the ground. The cemetery sued Paula Tigneau in 2023 over the dispute, claiming no actual human remains were buried there, and that Tigneau signed documents releasing Skyline from responsibility in the event of a mistake. A judge ultimately denied a stay in the case, allowing the grave to be disinterred. According to court documents, the Reeser family had no desire to participate in the lawsuit. The documents said, quote, "The Reesers are a grieving family who do not wish to bring publicity to the loss of their child, their grief, their family plot, or their decisions around death, loss, burial, and other private matters implicated by this litigation. The Reesers have no claims asserted against them in this litigation and have not asserted any claims against either of the parties in this litigation other than those assigned to and asserted by Skyline herein. But these circumstances don't make a difference to Williams and the rest of Tigneau's family. Now, the grave that was supposed to be their son's has been taken away from them.
I think the humanity or lack of it, the cruelty, and someone feeling so entitled that they just wanted that piece of property when someone's son is already in the ground, was sort of unfathomable.
Williams says the family will have to come together once again and decide on what will hopefully be a new memorial site for their loved one. And now he hopes others can avoid finding themselves in their same situation.
In people's weakest times, they prey on them with poor, deceitful contracts, rules and regulations. It's a shameful thing that they've done.
And I reached out to Skyline Memorial Gardens for a comment on this story. They responded in an email saying, quote, "Out of respect for the privacy of those we are honored to serve, we will not be commenting on this matter," end quote. Reporting live from Northwest Portland, McKenna Marks, Fox 12 Oregon.